Ahoy, my friends. Welcome aboard the Afro Tales podcast. I'm your storyteller, Amon Mazingo. Join me as we explore the tales that grew from the people of Indigenous and African descent in the Americas and the Caribbean. After, come and see me, chef, who will impart upon you a recipe for the story you have just heard. So with no further ado, let us set sail on this new age of exploration. Raven and Crayfish. Flying home to his nest one day, Raven spied a succulent crayfish swimming in the lake below. He swooped down and caught that fat crayfish in his beak, thinking of the feast he would have when he came to his tree top home. Crayfish was terrified, knowing that she was seconds away from becoming a raven's dinner. She began to speak as calmly and sweetly as she could. "Oh, great and powerful Raven, I'm so pleased to meet you. You know, I had supper with your father and mother a little while ago. What a delightful couple." "Uncle," said Raven, because his beak was firmly shut, holding tight to his dinner. "And I have often noticed how enchanting your brothers and sisters are. What a handsome family," continued Crayfish. "Uncle," said Raven, his beak clamped shut, looking forward to his dinner time. "Of course, they are all majestic," said Crayfish, "but none is your equal. You are the cleverest Raven. No, that is not enough. You are the cleverest creature of all creatures since the world's creation." Delighted by this flattery, Raven opened his beak to agree. Before he could say a word, Crayfish wiggled free and fell back into the lake below, disappearing into the deep, dark water. That night, the cleverest creature of all creatures since the world's creation had to go without his dinner. The end. How Raven Stole Back the Light. When the world began, everyone lived on this side of the sky. But a great magician named Tupalik was curious and decided to find out what lay on the other side. He cut a hole in the sky and climbed through. Tupalik liked what he found so much he decided to build a house there and take up residence. But Tupalik's wife did not like her new home. She missed her friends and felt lonely. So Tupalik decided to cheer her up by stealing the light. He climbed through the hole in the sky, grabbed the sun and moon, and thrust them into 2 bags. Then he returned home and hung the bags from the roof of their house. After that, Tupalik let the light out only when he felt like it, and the rest of the world had to go without. Soon, everyone on this side of the sky grew thin and pale from lack of light. So, they went in search of Raven, who had helped them before. "Raven!" they cried. "Someone has stolen the sun and the moon. We're dying from lack of light. Please, please, can you get it back for us?" Raven thought hard. "I'm sure Tupalik has something to do with this," he said. He flew off across the world until he saw the hole in the sky and went through it. On the other side, he found Tupalik dozing in the warmth of the sun, which he happened to have let out that day. "Hey, Tupalik," said Raven, "I want the sun and moon back." But Tupalik laughed and shook his head. "Go away, little Raven. I need the sun and moon to cheer up my wife. Besides, I like them too much to let them go." Raven flew off, thinking of ways to steal the sun and moon. Then he saw a beautiful maiden going to fetch water from the river. Raven knew she must be Tupalik's daughter. An idea flashed into his head, and with a chuckle, he flew down to the river's edge and turned himself into a tiny feather floating on the water. Filling her jug in the stream, Tupalik's daughter didn't notice when the feather floated inside. And when she took a huge gulp of water, she did not feel the feather slip down her throat. A few months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy who was really still Raven in disguise. Tupalik and his wife were delighted to have their grandson, not knowing he was actually Raven. They doted on the baby so much that they gave him everything he asked for. And Raven made sure he was always asking for something, yelling all day at the top of his lungs. One day, while Tupalik was away hunting, Raven started crying for the bags that held the sun and moon. At first, his wife and daughter ignored the baby, but soon they grew so sick of hearing him wail and scream that they let him play with the bag that held the moon. When they weren't looking, Raven untied the bag and the moon flew out and vanished through the smoke hole in the roof. When Tupalik came home, he was furious. But at the sight of his grandson smiling and peaceful, he softened. "After all, I still have the sun," he said. Soon the old magician settled down to sleep. And at once, Raven began to scream and cry for the bag that held the sun. Tupalik, weary and wanting sleep, told his wife to give the baby anything as long as it kept him quiet. So Tupalik's wife took down the bag and gave it to the baby. As soon as she was looking the other way, Raven ran out of the house and turned back into his own form. The bag was tied too tight for him to open it, so Raven flew back through the hole in the sky, carrying the bag in his talons. The moon was back on our side of the sky by this time, having floated up through the hole Tupalik had made. And the people had begun to live normal lives again, though they still missed the sun. Flying across the moonlit sky, Raven grew tired of carrying the heavy bag. Spying some fishermen, he cried out, "Please, give me some fish. I'll let out the sun if you do." Now, Raven had been gone for so long that people had forgotten about asking him to steal back the sun. So the fishermen were reluctant to give him anything. Raven pecked angrily at the bag, and a few bright spots of light flew out, becoming the stars. "Maybe he does have the sun," the fishermen said, and they gave Raven some food. As soon as he was strong enough, Raven tore open the bag, and out flew the sun. At first, the light blinded everyone, But after a while, they grew used to it again and threw a huge party for Raven to thank him. As for Tupalik and his family, some say they moved back to this side of the sky. Others swear they live on the other side to this day, and that every now and then, Tupalik managed to steal back the sun. But clever Raven always manages to return it to us. The end. Wow. So that was a couple great stories coming from the book Trick of the Tale, a collection of trickster tales from around the world by John Matthews. This is my first time coming across this book. And I know I would never be able to find this particular book because it's not one of those books that are like really in print anymore. And I just so happened to come across this book while looking for Raven stories online. And I must say, if you don't have access to a internet library, or if you don't support internet archives, please do. They house wonderful stories and wonderful books. And for some people, it's the only way that they're able to get books. I want to say they're supported by the Library of Congress. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But it is a great website and it really helps me find stories that I wouldn't be able to find in my local library or bookstore where I live. But I love Raven. Raven is one of the trickster spirits in American folklore. He is a deep part of the Pacific Northwest Native American tribes, indigenous tribes of that region, but flows through many of the other indigenous tribes of the Americas. Raven, in the first story, as an example, that story technically comes from Liberia, but if you know the history of Liberia, it was resettled by formerly enslaved Africans here from America that were shipped back to Africa, and Liberia as a country was settled by that. That's why I went ahead and included that story, because although it could be predominantly from the region that Liberia now sits in, or it could be the fact that these African Americans or these enslaved Africans that were here in the Americas went back to Africa and carried that story from here back there. You know what I mean? I don't know. And that's how folklore is. It goes back and forth through, trade and through people's travels. So where their ancestors brought Anansi and Brother Rabbit and, those stories to the Americas, they may have turned right around and took, a traditionally indigenous American story back to Africa. And that is beautifully done. That is a beautiful thing to think about, that these people were able to do that and spread that story to back to the mother continent. The second story is a traditional Pacific Northwest story about how Raven got the sun and moon back, got the light back. Because of the area that this story comes from, being that it is more of an Alaskan or Inuit story, I wouldn't be surprised if this story wasn't an explanation for why Alaska has that dark period. You know what I mean? We know during the winter months, Alaska goes through a period where it's, kind of darker throughout the year. And during the summer, it's sunshine, all day, the whole 24 hours of sun, 24 hours of night type thing that Alaska is known for, is famous for, that region. So the fact that Tupalik comes back and steals the sun every now and again, to me, is that explanation for that time period of the year. That's the time period that Tupalik has come back, stolen the sun, and now Raven has to go back and retrieve it once again, and the cycle continues over and over again, And that part, and maybe even that part where they said the sun is so bright and people had to get used to it. Maybe that's those summer months. I'm just speculating here that when Raven brings the sun back and opens it up, and now the sun is just so bright, that's a representation of that time where the 24 hours of sun, they had to get used to it, and now the cycle is back and in the way it's supposed to be. That's just my take on it. I don't know what you guys feel about that. All right, but that's all I have. A couple of great Raven stories. I wanted to go deeper into what the actual stories meant, but just the history of the two stories themselves and how they operate in our history, to me, was a little bit more. Maybe if you're on my Patreon, I'll go a little bit deeper. If you see this, you may hear a different outro or a different analysis. Okay. But thank you for coming to see me. Thank you for being on this voyage with me. Chef has a wonderful recipe coming from the Pacific Northwest. And until we meet again, as always, have a blessed day. Welcome, my friends, to the Galley. I am your chef, and today we have a wonderful recipe inspired by the stories you have just heard. Today, we will be creating halibut stew. Now, what will you need for this delicious recipe? 2 medium potatoes cubed, 1/4 cup chopped white onion, 2 cloves garlic, 1/2 cup mushrooms, chanterelles, oysters, or morels if they are in season, 2 large halibut fillets. Can substitute with any large flaked white fish, but halibut, please. 6 to 8 medium prawns, 1/2 of a crab, small handful of fresh parsley, 2 cups chicken or fish stock. Let's do fish, right? 1/2 cup of canned mushroom soup, oil for frying, 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 teaspoon smoked applewood seasoning, salt and pepper to taste. Now, how do we put this together? Easy. If using chanterelles or oyster mushrooms, tear them by hand into bite-sized chunks and fry with onions, potatoes, and garlic in heated pot with some oil and butter. Add salt and pepper and stir to prevent sticking until the onions are translucent and potatoes are starting to brown. Add stock and allow stew to slow boil until the spots are almost cooked. Cut 1 of the halibut fillets into spoon-sized cubes and add to the stew along with the crab. Meanwhile, season the other halibut fillet and fry in a small skillet until it is cooked to your desire. This will be the topper of the stew set aside. Now, add mushroom soup while stirring the stew to prevent lumping. Add the prawns and some chopped parsley and remove pot from stove as soon as the prawns have changed color to prevent overcooking. Ladle the stew into serving bowl and top with the pan-fried halibut fillet. Top with a bit of fresh parsley and serve with bannock or bread of your choice. And that is it, my friends. Now, go make this recipe yours. And until I have another wonderful recipe for you, remember the trickery of Raven. And as always, enjoy. Thank you, my friends, for coming on this voyage. Thanks to Art by Chalet for the logo, episode, and shirt designs. You can get t-shirts and other items on tpublic.com. You can contact me on all socials at AfroTalesCast. That's AfroTales Cast. And email me at AfroTalesCast@gmail.com. You may also become a benefactor by simply sharing with any and everyone, giving a thumbs up, a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app of choice, or simply donating on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. So until we meet again, may your winds be fair and your seas follow.